She'll figure it out. Destiny always does. Besides, Kristen needs this more than she does. I was standing just outside the kitchen doorway when I heard my mother say that. Her voice was low and satisfied, like she'd already made peace with a decision that would change my life. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stood there, holding my bag, listening to my own name get passed around like I was an inconvenience they'd already figured out how to manage. That was the day I learned my future had already been decided, without me, without my voice, without even a conversation. My name is Destiny. I'm 34 years old, and that moment in the hallway, that wasn't the beginning of the story. It was just the first time I finally heard what had always been true. I work as a grant writer for a nonprofit that supports first-generation college students. It's not a glamorous job. It doesn't come with a corner office or a company car, but I love it because I know exactly what it feels like to have a door almost open for you and then quietly close. I was the dependable one in my family. Straight A's, no drama, no trouble. My parents used to say, "Destiny will be fine no matter what." I heard that so often I started to believe it was a compliment. It wasn't. It was a permission slip, permission to overlook me. My sister Kristen was the one they always praised, the prized child, the one who got the applause at dinner, the encouraging phone calls, the stories told proudly to relatives. Kristen had flair. Kristen had vision. Kristen had big dreams. And according to my parents, Kristen needed support in ways that I simply didn't. When I was 16, my parents opened a college fund in my name. They sat me down and made it feel like a promise. "This is yours," my dad said, "for your future." I held on to that promise for years. I planned around it. I built around it. I wasn't asking for more than anyone else. I was asking for exactly what was mine. But I want you to know something before we go further into this story. I wasn't flashy, I wasn't loud, but I had something quietly growing on the side that none of them ever thought to ask about. If you've ever been the responsible one in your family and still ended up last, I need you to hit that subscribe button right now. You know this feeling. You did everything right. You stayed out of trouble, you made the smart choices, and somehow that was used as a reason to pass you over. Have you ever done everything right and still been overlooked by the very people who were supposed to have your back? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to hear from you. Click hype and let's go. I want to tell you about the day I stopped pretending I hadn't noticed. It was a Sunday afternoon. The kitchen smelled like the lemon dish soap my mother always used, sharp and clean in a way that felt almost ironic given what was happening in that room. I sat down across from my parents and I asked them, calmly, directly, about the college fund. I'd been accepted into a competitive public administration program. I had a partial scholarship. The fund was supposed to cover the rest. Simple, clean, exactly what it was promised for. My mother looked at me the way she always did when she'd already rehearsed her answer. "Kristen's boutique needed startup capital," she said. "You have a job. You're stable." I looked at my father. He nodded slowly. "You're the strong one, Destiny. You don't need it like she does." I asked them if they planned to replace it. My father picked up his coffee cup. My mother started talking about a neighbor's garden. The subject just floated away like it had never existed. Later that week, I did some digging. The fund wasn't redirected. It wasn't borrowed. It was fully liquidated. $22,000. Gone. Poured into a boutique that sold handmade candles and custom tote bags and lasted exactly 8 months before Kristen decided it wasn't aligned with her energy anymore. Then came the dinner, a regular Sunday meal with a few relatives around the table. Kristen lifted her glass and smiled at our parents. "I just want to say thank you," she said warmly, "for always believing in my dreams." Everyone at that table smiled and nodded. My mother reached over and touched Kristen's hand. My father beamed. Not one person looked at me. I kept my face calm. I picked up my fork, but something shifted inside me that night, something that would not shift back. The betrayals didn't stop there. They came in different shapes, and each one was its own kind of cold. A few weeks after that dinner, I found out my parents held a family meeting about my grandmother Ida's estate. A real meeting, sitting around a table, talking about property and finances and what grandma might leave behind. I wasn't invited. When I asked my mother about it, she waved her hand. "It didn't really concern you," she said. "We just covered the basics." I was a granddaughter. I spent every holiday at Grandma Ida's house my entire life, but somehow I didn't need to be in the room. Then there was my cousin Tanya's birthday party. I was standing near the food table when I heard my mother's voice carry across the room. She was talking to one of our older aunts, and she wasn't whispering. "Destiny's always been the practical one," she said. "She doesn't really have big dreams like Kristen." I heard my aunt murmur something in response. I heard my mother laugh softly. 3 people near me had gone quiet. They'd heard it too. I smiled and reached for a napkin and said nothing. A few days after that, Kristen called. Her voice had that particular sweetness it got when she wanted something. She needed a small loan, she said, just to get back on her feet, just to relaunch the boutique with a better strategy. And then, almost gently, she added, "I'd hate for Mom and Dad to think you've been pulling away from the family lately. You know how they worry." She didn't say it like a threat. She said it like a concern. That made it worse. I told her no. I kept my voice even. She hung up after a few seconds of silence. I kept showing up to family events after that. I kept answering calls. I kept my face steady. But I had stopped grieving. I had stopped replaying the moments and asking why. I was done asking why. I was paying attention to what I had already built, and they had no idea what that was. Here is what my family didn't know. For 3 years, while my mother was commenting on how much time I spent on my computer, while Kristen was relaunching boutiques and collecting praise, I had been building something. Quietly, anonymously. I ran a blog focused on grant writing and nonprofit consulting. I started it as a resource, something I wished had existed when I was starting out. It grew, first slowly, then steadily, then faster than I had planned for. I built a paid membership community around it. I created templates and courses and live workshops. By the time this story reaches its turning point, that blog was earning me more every single month than my actual salary. My mother once said it out loud, in front of 2 of her friends while I was visiting on a Saturday. "I don't know why she wastes her evenings on a computer." She shook her head like it was a quirk she'd learned to accept. Her friends nodded sympathetically. I kept my expression neutral and offered to refill everyone's tea. I had kept the blog anonymous on purpose. At first, it was professional strategy. I didn't want my day job and my side work to blur together before I was ready. But then, as the months passed, the anonymity became something else. It became a boundary. My family hadn't earned the right to stand in the light of something they had laughed at. That brand, that community, that income, it was mine, fully mine, untouched by their opinions. But I had been planning a change, a public launch, a face reveal, my real name, my real story, connected to the platform I had built from nothing. The timing, as it turned out, was going to be perfect. They had no idea that the thing they laughed at was quietly making me free. It was a Thursday morning when my phone rang, and I didn't recognize the number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. The voice on the other end was calm and professional, with a warmth underneath it that felt deliberate. "Destiny, my name is Harold Calloway. I was your grandmother Ida's attorney. I was hoping we could find a time to speak privately before the formal will reading is scheduled." I sat down slowly. "Of course," I said. When I walked into Mr. Calloway's office, it smelled like old wood and paper, the kind of room that holds a lot of history without announcing it. He offered me a seat and folded his hands on the desk. "Your grandmother spoke about you often," he said carefully. "She wanted to make sure you heard certain things first." What he told me next stayed with me for days. Grandma Ida had known about the college fund. She had known what my parents did, and she had watched quietly, the way she always watched, seeing everything and saying little. 2 years before she passed, she had updated her will. She had done it without telling my parents, without mentioning it to Kristen, without a word to anyone except Mr. Calloway. She had seen me clearly. She always had. Meanwhile, the rest of my family was feeling comfortable. A family friend had apparently told my parents that Grandma Ida left things pretty equally, and they took that as confirmation that everything was already settled in their favor. Kristen started talking about renovating the family house, about having breathing room for the first time. She talked about it at dinner, casually, like it was already done. My parents smiled and agreed and passed the bread.
No one asked what I thought. No one wondered if I had heard anything. The formal will reading was set for a Friday morning. I wore a navy blouse and flat shoes. I arrived 5 minutes early. Mr. Calloway greeted me at the door, and we exchanged a small nod. Nothing dramatic, just an understanding between two people who knew what was about to happen. My parents arrived together, dressed neatly, carrying the quiet confidence of people who believe the conclusion has already been written. Kristen came in behind them, phone in hand, wearing a bright yellow wrap dress. She sat down, crossed her ankles, and folded her hands in her lap like she was waiting for good news she'd already counted on. The office was cool and still. The only sound was the faint hum of the air system overhead and the soft settling of chairs. Mr. Calloway opened the folder in front of him and began. The first items were sentimental: jewelry to specific cousins, a quilt to an aunt, a set of books to a family friend, small amounts to several relatives. Standard, quiet, dignified. Kristen shifted once in her seat. My mother's posture was perfectly upright. Then Mr. Calloway paused. He reached for a sealed envelope and looked directly at me. There is a personal letter included in this estate, written by Ida and addressed to her granddaughter Destiny. Per her instructions, it is to be read aloud in this room. My mother blinked. My father sat up slightly, Kristen's hands unclenched in her lap. Mr. Calloway opened the envelope and began to read. Grandma Ida's voice came through in every sentence, steady, honest, clear. She wrote about watching me grow up as the one who never asked for a clause. She wrote about the college fund. She named it directly. She described what she had been told by my parents when she quietly asked, and what she had figured out on her own when the answers didn't add up. And then she wrote the line that made the room go completely silent. I watched them take from you and call it love. I want the record to be clear. My mother opened her mouth. Mr. Calloway looked up from the letter with calm, steady eyes and continued reading before she could form a full sentence. The assets Grandma Ida had set aside specifically for me were listed next: her paid-off rental property, valued at $190,000, a private investment account totaling $47,000, both held separately from the shared estate, both designated for me alone, with no conditions and no room for contest.
My mother found her voice. "This isn't right," she said sharply. "She didn't tell us about any of this. There must be a mistake." Mr. Calloway set down the letter and looked at her evenly. "She anticipated a challenge," he said. "It's been legally structured. There's nothing to contest." The room settled into a different kind of silence after that, the kind that has weight. I reached into the folder I had brought with me and placed a single printed document on the table. It was a one-page summary, my blog's monthly revenue for the past 12 months, and beneath that, the press release for my upcoming public brand launch, scheduled for the following month. My real name, my real platform, my real numbers. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lean forward. I looked at my parents, then at Kristen, and I said, "I just want you all to know, I was never waiting for permission." Nobody spoke. Kristen looked at the paper, then at me, then back at the paper. My father's jaw was tight. My mother was very still. I picked up my folder, stood up, thanked Mr. Calloway, and walked out. The weeks that followed moved quickly. My brand launch went live on a Tuesday morning, and the response from my community was immediate. People who had followed the blog anonymously for years showed up in comments and messages, saying they had always wondered who was behind it, saying the work had changed how they approached their careers, saying thank you. The platform grew faster in those first 2 weeks than it had in the entire previous year. I used part of Grandma Ida's gift to invest in the platform's infrastructure. Better systems, a real team, a content plan that finally had room to breathe. I used another portion to put a down payment on a small house. Not large, not flashy, just mine. My parents called a few weeks later. I answered. My mother's voice was softer than usual, careful in a way I recognized as the sound of someone figuring out how to say something without fully saying it. I listened. I kept my tone warm. I did not reopen anything. Some doors don't need to be walked through twice. Kristen sent a long text message one Sunday evening.
I read it once, all the way through. Then I set my phone down and went back to what I was working on. I didn't reply. Grandma Ida didn't just leave me property. She left me proof that someone in that family had always seen me clearly, had always tracked what I was carrying, and had decided, quietly and deliberately, to make sure I was taken care of when it mattered most. That meant more than the money. That meant more than the house. That was the part I carried forward. I didn't need an apology from my parents. I didn't need Kristen to understand what she had been part of. I had my answer. I had always had it. I just finally had the evidence to hold in my hands. If your family ever used your stability as a reason to take from you, if being responsible somehow meant you deserved less, then you already know the particular sting I'm talking about. The way "you'll be fine" can be the most dismissive thing a person ever says to you. If someone redirected money that was meant for your future, if they called it love while they did it, I want to hear your story. Drop it in the comments. Every single one. Did your family ever use your strength against you? Tell me below. Subscribe to this community because this is a space for every person who was overlooked and still found a way to rise. Click hype to help this story reach everyone whose family once bet against them. Standing up for yourself, even when you do it quietly, even when no one in that room knows what you've been building, takes real strength. If you've been there, subscribe and become part of this community. Let me know this story meant something to you by clicking hype, and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel.